Well, good morning and welcome to Resonate Church. Big happy Father's Day to all our spiritual and physical fathers. For those watching online this morning or later today, happy Father's Day. I just want you to know one thing, and you are loved. Today we start a new sermon series titled I Am Peter. It's a 4-week sermon series, and I'm so excited to hear Daryl speak in the sermon series I Am Peter. Hope you enjoy today's sermon.
Good morning. Hi. I'm really pleased that I'm here, ready to start a sermon series. Sure, I'd rather be doing this in person, one-on-one, or with the congregation, but well, it is what it is. So here we are, and I'm about to start a sermon series which I'm calling I Am Peter. When I first spoke with Jacob about this sermon series, I think I said to him that I could see it being about a 7-part sermon series, because if you look at the New Testament, in the Gospels alone, there is over 200 times that Peter, or Simon Peter, is mentioned in the Gospels. And then you look beyond that into the book of Acts, and there's Peter again. And then in the letters from either Peter himself or Paul, Peter is such a big part of the New Testament. He is a big part of the gospel stories. And so I thought I'd be potentially doing 6, 7, 8 sermons in this series. And originally when I spoke with Jacob, I said, I could call this series We Are Peter. And the reason why I said that is I think that each and every one of us, when we look at the sermon, when we look at Peter in the Bible, when I speak about this, I think we can all see a little bit of Peter in ourselves. But I can only speak for myself, so I'm calling this series I Am Peter. And Jacob asked me to make it a 4-part series. So I've got to condense down, 6, 7, 8 messages that I'd been considering, condense that down into 4. Well, I've got this first one that I'm about to preach on, and I've got to tell you that this one, because of the way that things have changed in the world, in my life, in the groups and organisations that I'm a part of, my messages have been changing. I had a sermon plan, and it's changed so many times. This message that I'm giving today is message number 1 in a 4-part series. But I have to tell you that this is version 4 of message 1. And this message is called, If You Were Perfect, Why Would You Need Jesus? If you were perfect, why would you need Jesus? So I'm going to start by reading from Matthew chapter 26, beginning at verse 69. Matthew 26, 69. But please let me pray first. Lord, I thank you that I am able to bring this message to the Resonate family. And I pray, Lord, that each person that looks at this sees a little bit of Peter in themselves, so that they can understand what it is that I'm speaking about. I thank you for this message, Lord. Thank you for the ability to bring this sermon series. I pray, Lord, that it will be met well by those who are listening. In your mighty name I pray. Amen. So, Matthew chapter 26, beginning at verse 69. And it says, Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." And he denied it again with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. So today I'm bringing a sermon message about a failure that is so shocking that more than 2,000 years later we are still speaking about it. And I think there's 2 parts to this story. First, there's Peter and him denying knowing Jesus 3 times. And then secondly, Christ forgiving and restoring Peter. So the first part depended entirely on Peter. The second part entirely on Jesus. Peter took charge of his own failure, and Jesus took charge of Peter's restoration. But behind this story, there lies this wonderful, hope-filled truth. And that's that failure is not an event. Failure is an event. It is an event. It's not a destiny. Failure is an event, not a destiny. And that's good news, because sooner or later we're all going to fail. And if we, to tell the truth, we fail over and over and over again. But the good thing is that Peter's story so abundantly proves to us that what may look like initial failure isn't. It just depends on what happens next. Failure doesn't mean that you've blown everything. It means you've got some hard lessons to learn. It doesn't mean that you're a permanent loser. It simply means that you're not as smart as you thought you were. It doesn't mean that you should give up. Instead, it means that you should allow God to show you your next step. It doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. It means that God has got a different plan for you. Now, I think that only those that have really failed big are going to get the true meaning from this message. If you've only made little mistakes along the way, then you may not truly appreciate and be as deeply moved as I have been in preparing this message. But if you've known large failure, then I think this message could be for you. When we've failed, and especially if we've failed someone that we truly love, those that we love most, our mind starts to be a swirl of emotions. We've got embarrassment, anger, shame, despair. We feel dirty and worthless because we've acted so foolishly. When we've hurt someone deeply, we want to know if they still love us. I mean, do you still love me? For that matter, can I love myself again? Do you forgive me? And can I forgive myself? I don't know if it's true, but in researching this, some of the stuff that I was reading said that Peter never forgot that night that he denied even knowing Jesus 3 times. Now, I don't doubt that it's true, but it said that every night at that time, the time where Peter was in the courtyard denying Jesus, every night he would sit and pray at that time. And another part that I read said that Peter wept every time he heard a rooster crow. So how does Jesus restore his fallen disciple? As I've looked at this, I believe that it's a 4-stage process. And the first stage is that he sent for him. Jesus sent for Peter. It says that when the women arrived at the tomb early on the Sunday morning, an angel announced the good news: he is risen. He's not here. And it says that in Mark 16, it says that the angel told them to go tell his disciples and Peter. How's that? What do you think that is about? Tell his disciples and Peter. Peter's denial seems to have separated him from the other disciples. And I don't doubt for a moment that he would have been worried about it. He would have been thinking to himself, what now? I mean, am I a disciple or am I a traitor? Peter may have failed, but Jesus sent for him. Just a few hours earlier than that, Peter had said, Lord, you will never wash my feet. And then later he bragged about his courage. He bragged that if everyone else fell away and deserted him, Peter said, I will be there. I will not desert you. And wow, that was so wrong at that time. Peter might have failed when he drew his sword to chop off the ear of the high priest's servant, but Jesus still sent for him. I mean, Peter's attempt to protect Jesus, it did nothing except for have Jesus turn and say, put your sword away, it isn't to be this way. Peter might have failed in the courtyard saying, Jesus, I don't know him. But all the same, Jesus still sent for him. After everything, the risen Christ sent for Peter. He doesn't write Peter off. He doesn't put him in this biggest loser category or anything like that. He simply has plans for Peter. He's got plans to give him a hope and a future. And above all, I think he's got plans to give him a second chance. Number 2, he met with him. Jesus met with Peter. Question for you, where did Peter go after denying Christ? And the answer is that we don't know. There's nothing in the Bible to say where he went. But I would suggest that Peter did what most of us do when we totally muck up. When we've made a huge mistake, the last thing that we want to do is to be around people and have them know about the mistake that we've made, especially those that we love. Having let them down, we don't want to be there. Sin separates us not only from God, but from God's people, it appears. Sin isolates us so that the devil can have his way, telling us that we mucked up and no one cares about us. And so we put ourselves in some form of a self-imposed solitary confinement. And I think that's what happened to Peter that weekend. Wherever he was, he must have felt so alone. The last thing that we are told is that when Jesus turned and looked at him, Peter wept bitterly. We're not told where Peter was during the crucifixion on the Friday. We're not told where he was later that evening when they took Jesus and buried him in the tomb. We can only guess that he's retreated away to somewhere by himself where he could go over what had happened in that day and knock himself. I'm sure that he was sitting there saying, why? Why did I do that? What made me think that I would be better than everyone else? How could I have said that? How could I have done that? And what does Jesus think of me now? Well, we find the answer to that question in the fact that Jesus made a special appearance to Peter sometime on what we call Easter Sunday. We don't know where it was, when exactly it was, and we don't know how long that meeting lasted for. But we do know that there's two places in the New Testament where we're told about a meeting between Jesus and Peter. Luke 24 verse 34 says, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." And then 1 Corinthians 15 says, "He was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. Aren't you just so pleased that Jesus appeared and met with Peter? I am. I really am. Jesus not only sends for Peter, but then he meets with him before he meets with the others. It's a one-on-one meeting, so there's no public humiliation. Since Peter denied Christ, they had to set that right between the two of them. And with wisdom, with absolute grace, Jesus went to Peter. He didn't wait for Peter to search him out and find him. Jesus went and met with Peter. Doesn't that impress you? It really, I love that. I love that. Number 3, he challenged him down to the nitty-gritty. Jesus challenged Peter. So for this we go to John 21. Let's see, we've spoken about this the last few Wednesday nights at Word and Worship with John. It's the evening on the Sea of Galilee, not long after the resurrection. Peter's had his moment where he's said that, I've had enough, I can't do this anymore. I'm going fishing. I'm a fisherman, I'm going fishing. And 6 of the disciples say, all right, we're coming with you. So they go and they spend a night fishing, and at the end of the night they're coming back in and they have caught absolutely nothing. And in that morning, an unknown man standing on the shore calls out to them and tells them to throw their nets over on the other side of the boat. And they do, and they catch so many fish they can't bring the net in. And it's then that John says, I reckon that's Jesus. And Peter gets so excited that he grabs his gear, dives in and swims to shore so that he can go and be with Jesus. And when I look at that, and as we've been looking at it on Wednesday nights, I've wondered a couple of times. Jesus was there all night watching them. We know that he was there long enough to catch his own fish, light a fire, and sit there and watch them. And so I wonder a few times, why, if he was there all night, why did he allow his men, his disciples, to go through the frustration of a complete night catching nothing? And I think the answer is that they needed to fail. Failure was really necessary for them at that time so that they were ready for the successes that they were going to have. If that unidentified man standing on the shore had have called out to them earlier on when they first got out there in the boat and after they'd been there for a little while, if he had called out and said, guys, you're fishing on the wrong side, throw your nets on the other side, I'm pretty sure that they would have said, don't tell us what to do, we're fishermen. We've fished this lake for so long, we've done this for many years, we know how to catch fish, don't tell us about it. But because the night dragged on and they had caught nothing, they were then ready to take someone's advice. And isn't that the way how it is for us? The Lord allows us to fail on our own so that we might be ready to learn that it is through His power that we can have success. The disciples needed to fail so that they could learn to depend on Christ. Sometimes it takes some shameful failures for us to be finally ready, for us to wake up and be ready to accept the need of Jesus. We've spoken about it on Wednesday night, how there is John 21 verse 1 to 14 match up so clearly with Luke chapter 5 verse 1 to 11. Jesus on that occasion tells Peter to go out deeper and let his nets down. Despite his doubts, Peter does that. He follows Jesus' demands, his command, and he ends up catching so many fish, he's got to call out to another boat and get them to come, and they filled 2 boats. So many fish. So we've now done this full circle where from the beginning the command was to drop the net and catch fish. And here at the end, drop the net and catch fish. But the question really on both occasions was the same question. And that's, Peter, will you obey me even though it doesn't make sense? It's the same question that we are asked. Will you obey me when you think that you know a better way? Will you obey me when the path forward looks a little bit unclear? Will you obey me when your instincts tell you to do something differently? And more to the point on this occasion, will you obey me now that you have failed and failed and failed? Number 4, he reinstates him. Jesus reinstates Peter. After breakfast was over, Peter and Jesus went for a walk. And this is a part of the story that most people will remember and recognise. When they finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" I'm reading from John 21, verse 15 and 17. "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." And the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because he asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Peter and Jesus had that conversation, according to the New King James Bible. They had that conversation around a charcoal fire. Did you know that there is only one other place in the New Testament where there's mention of a charcoal fire? And that place is in the courtyard where Peter denied knowing Jesus. So by one fire, he said, "I don't know him." And then by the next fire, he says, "Lord, you know I love you." By one charcoal fire, he denied Christ, and by the next charcoal fire, Christ restored Peter. You might wonder why Christ questioned Peter the way that he did, and why publicly, why there in front of the other disciples. And I think he questioned him publicly because Peter denied knowing him publicly. The other disciples needed to hear Peter humble himself and declare his love for Christ. Because otherwise the pain of what had happened could have lingered on forever. The man who had been so boastful, so sure of himself, so confident of his own courage, was now humbled. I think it's amazing that very first question from Jesus, "Do you love me more than these?" Wasn't that a subtle reminder of what Peter had said the night before? Where he said that he was more courageous than the others. And this time Peter declares his love for Christ. But do you notice that he doesn't compare himself to others? He doesn't say, yes, Lord, I love you more than these. He simply says, I love you. And I'm pretty sure that being questioned by Jesus in the way that he was would have been painful. It would have been really difficult. But it was necessary. Jesus had to open the wound so that he could clean it properly, to let it heal. He's getting rid of Peter's guilt and shame by dealing with it openly. But I want you to consider what he didn't do. He didn't try to make Peter feel guilty. He didn't humiliate him publicly. He didn't ask him, are you even sorry for what you did? He doesn't make him promise to do better next time. He just asks, do you love me? Once we hurt someone that we love, it's hard to even look them in the face. And then it's hard to answer those questions that they're asking. But they have to be asked. Those questions, how could you have done that? I mean, what were you thinking? Do you even love me anymore? The questions have to be asked, and they've got to be answered, and they've got to be answered openly and honestly if you're ever going to recover from that situation. Peter needed to see the enormity of his sin if he was going to realise how huge Christ's forgiveness was. Only then could he really understand the forgiveness of Christ. Without the pain, he would never have got better. And until we face the truth in ourselves, we can never be free. That's step one for recovery. Admitting that we are powerless, that nothing good lives within us. That's step one. And step two in recovery is that acceptance that there is a greater power than ourselves who can restore us. It's trusting in Jesus that saves us. When Christ asked the question the third time, it's pretty clear that Peter's heart was really grieving. He was so upset and he blurted out, Lord, you know all things. And I think with those words alone, Peter had just renounced his own self-confidence. On the night before, up in the upper room, he thought that he knew what was right. And now he doesn't even trust himself. He doesn't trust his own words, his own heart. Instead, he trusts the Lord in all things. You, Lord, you know all things. And that's a huge step. That is a huge step in Christian growth. It's a great advance to come to that place where you can say, my trust is in the Lord alone. And sometimes we have to hit rock bottom and hit it really hard before we can say that. And did it work? Did this painful surgery, did it bring did it bring the desired healing? I think it did, because Peter never ever denied Jesus again. And instead, on the day of Pentecost, fully restored, he stood in the temple courts and preached a gospel sermon. The very temple court where he had denied even knowing Christ, he was now preaching a sermon to 3,000 people about Jesus. And his message sermon that he preached there was so powerful that 3,000 people were saved. And that's the people that have been shouting out, crucify him, crucify him. The old Peter was gone forever. This new man was born when Jesus restored his fallen disciple. So as we come to the end of this first message in this 4-part series, what does Christ do with failure? He redeems it. He brings recovery to the failed. Christ brings recovery to the failed. God is able to forget our past. And we should too. And my Bible heroes are really David and Paul. But through looking at this, and for the next 4 weeks, you guys can look at what I've been looking at too. And I now find that the disciple Peter is someone that I admire so much. I know him well because I see him every morning when I look in the mirror. I love Peter because I see myself in his stories, because I think his story is my story. For all of us, the process of Christian growth can be long and painful. It's got many ups and downs. And Peter, who is called the Rock, seemed very unrock-like so often. But it seemed that it took repeated failure to build in him a rock-like character. And through all of that, Jesus never gave up on him. Peter sent away the children. He often misunderstood the parables. He took his eyes off Jesus when he was walking on water and he began to sink. Peter suggested that he puts up 3 tents so they could stay sleeping up on the mountain with Elijah and Moses. He caused Jesus to pay tax, 4 drachma in tax, because Peter mouthed off. At Gethsemane, he slept when Jesus told him to stay awake and pray. And then Peter denied him 3 times. But the final irony is that from beginning to end, Jesus never gave up on him. Jesus believed in Peter more than Peter believed in himself. And that's how it is for us. If our life was perfect, then what would we need Jesus for? You see, the real hero in Peter's story isn't Peter, it's Jesus. And that's why chapter 21 in the Gospel of John is in the Bible. It's there so us Peter types can see that it doesn't matter how often we fall again and again, but by God's grace we can get back up again. That's mercy, because that truly is grace. If Christ did that for Peter, he can do it for me. He can do it for you. I'm going to be looking back at Peter over the next 4 weeks. Three weeks to go, sorry. I trust that you will have a look online next week as I go over this again next week. Part 2 of the 4-part series, I Am Peter. And this next week's, if all things are equal and I stay on plan, then next week will be called God Allows Us to Fail. Have a wonderful week. God bless. Look forward to seeing you again.
There's nobody greater. There's nobody greater. Sifter of the ocean sands, the currents flow where you command. Holy are you, God. Master of the raging sea, you calm the storm and restore peace. Holy are you, God. Jesus, my Lord, my God. There's nobody greater. There's nobody greater. You speak and mountains move. There's nobody greater. There's nobody